Hey folks, welcome back to Canada's Boxing Channel. Hope everyone's doing well and having a good day. I'm a little disappointed. We've got another stump of snow. It's still ongoing, so I'll be out on the tractor later on, I suppose. Oh well, such is the joys of living in northern Canada. In the summer it'll be roasting hot. In the winter it's freezing cold. Oh well, it's worst places to be, I'm sure. Anyhow, let's continue our look back to some of the great fighters of yesteryear. In this case, we're going to look not at a world champion, we'll look at a strong contender who had the division, the heavyweight division, been a bit weaker or not as deep, might well have been a world champion. Today, the very best boxer in the world is a heavyweight boxer, is Alexander Usyk, called the Cat. Well, we're going to stick with a feline theme because we're going to talk about Cleveland Big Cat Williams. Now, Cleveland Williams is one of my favorite fighters, actually. It's my channel. I talk about my favorites, right? He was born in 1933 in Griffin, Georgia. His parents were, if not dirt poor, they were certainly, not wealthy, quite impoverished, like many of the fighters we talk about. People grow up in circumstances that we today would consider to be really, really oppressive. And it built hard kids who became hard men. There's very little doubt about that. He took up boxing at an early age. And if you look at BoxRec, you will see the first 3 fights show on his pro record in 1949. That would make him 16. I believe, especially given the location, Griffin High School, that those were actually amateur fights, they're 4-round fights. Though BoxRec does say that his first fight took place in 1949, I think we're better off saying his first professional fight took place in 1951. BoxRec is our go-to resource, but it's not the Bible of record keeping. So there's some wiggle room there. He either turned pro in 1949 at 16, fighting 3 4-round contests, or he turned pro in 1951, which the latter makes more sense to me. Anyway, regardless, he quickly made a reputation. He's a very well-built guy, quick and very, very good finisher. We talked today about Daniel Dubois, who's got power in both hands and, is able to jump on an opponent and finish them off. Well, Cleveland Williams was that kind of guy. And so that's why he got the nickname the Big Cat, because he would pounce when somebody was injured, and he had power in both hands. He racked up an impressive series of knockout victories. He had one draw fairly early on, but then it was basically knockouts, TKOs, that kind of thing. He had a lot of raw power and a very aggressive style. This is not a man who believed in dragging out a fight, and he wasn't, he was not paid by the hour, he was paid by the job. He fought frequently throughout the 1950s, developed his skill against a variety of opponents, working his way up against tougher and tougher opposition at a time when boxing was, it was very deep and a lot of boxers around. And he was very well known, of course. This is an era when boxing was one of the most popular sports in North America. Today, when we live in our little boxing bubble, right? We're all boxing fans. But if you talk to somebody who's not really a boxing fan and you start throwing names around, even sometimes the names of champions, people will look at you like, don't really know, right? This was a different era. People knew the names and people followed people. It was a much wider sort of a body of people who followed boxing back in those days. Now, one of the defining rivalries of Cleveland Williams' career, and he's got a very impressive record. He's a knockout merchant, but one of the defining parts of his career is when he came up against Sonny Liston. Now, we've talked about Sonny Liston in another video. Sonny Liston, one of the one of the absolute most dangerous, toughest fighters ever to get in the ring. A legendary fighter who we sort of kind of skip over a lot because he had a relatively short time as world heavyweight champion. But he was, as we know from our previous conversation, an absolute wrecking ball of a human being. And had Sonny Liston not been around, it's quite possible, maybe probable, that Cleveland Williams would have become a world champion. However, the two first met in 1959, and Williams gave Liston a tough fight for as long as it went. He landed a lot of powerful shots early on, and in fact, Liston, together with Foreman and Chuvalo, these guys said that Cleveland Williams had some of the hardest punches that any boxer had. And, high praise indeed when you have people like George Chuvalo and Sonny Liston saying, this guy could punch, because clearly both those guys knew all about delivering, dynamite punches. Anyways, Liston's relentless pressure and his ability to absorb the punches of the big cat ultimately proved too much. He had Williams down twice in the third round, and that's as far as Williams made it. They had a rematch in 1960, followed a very similar pattern. Williams tries his best. This time, he succumbed to Liston's power in the second round. So it sounds like they were blowouts, but remember, it's Sonny Liston we're talking about. Despite these setbacks, Williams' performance solidified his reputation as an elite contender. In other words, people recognize that, hey, losing to Sonny Liston is no mean feat. Like the fact you got in and you were able to fight Sonny Liston for as short a time as you were able to fight him, getting a couple of rounds in with Sonny Liston was considered an achievement. Remember what Sonny Liston did to Floyd Patterson, right? Knocked him out in the first round on both of their fights. This again underlines how tough Liston was, just in case we needed a reminder. Now, throughout that period, he had 12, after his Liston fight, he had 12 more wins, including he beat Ernie Terrell, another great fighter of this era, and a guy who's famous later on for the Ali Terrell fight, where Ali is screaming at him, "What's my name? What's my name?" So he beat Ernie Terrell. Unfortunately, in a rematch, Ernie Terrell beat him. And he also had a draw with Eddie Machen, who's another really tough character. So these guys like Cleveland Williams, Ernie Terrell, Eddie Machen, any one of them could have been a world champion. But unfortunately, they were in a division that was dominated by Sonny Liston. Again, but for different timing, hey, could have been very different. But his win over Ernie Terrell is actually impressive, because of course Ernie Terrell would go on to win a version of the championship later on. Williams struggled with some injuries, and of course there were politics. I mean, we are talking about a time, a pre-civil rights America. We're talking of a time when there were a lot of organized groups involved in boxing. Many of them were nefarious type people, and so a lot of the boxing politics worked against Cleveland Williams to prevent Williams getting some of the title shots he might otherwise have legitimately gotten. He's a very, very strong contender. And then in 1964, so remember, this is at the height of the civil rights issue in America, tragedy struck. He was shot in the gut by a Texas highway patrolman by the name of Dale Whitten. Now, the official story is that it was a routine traffic stop. Apparently, Cleveland Williams had been speeding, and so Officer Whitten pulls him over, and a struggle ensued. No dash cams, no body cams. That technology was a generation or two down the road. Williams apparently resisted arrest, and the officer who carried a .357 Magnum revolver, probably a Colt trooper, went off by accident. That's the official story, okay? And what we do know is that the bullet went into his gut, lodged into his hip. The bullet was never, ever removed. There were 4 operations. He lost a kidney, he lost 10 feet of his intestine, and it caused a lot of atrophy of muscles. It could have killed him. By rights, it should have killed him. Now, boxing is a keen hobby or whatever of mine. Another one happens to be shooting. I've carried a revolver. I've owned lots of revolvers. I'm a gun nut in another aspect of my life. A .357 revolver will generally, from the factory, have a trigger pull somewhere between 11.5 and 15 pounds. That's the double action. For those of you who don't know about revolvers, you pull it back, the hammer comes back. It's about 15 pounds. If it's honed down, it could be about 11, right? And then goes forward. That's double action. If you pull the hammer back first and then pull the trigger, you're still dealing with about 4 to 6 pounds. Revolvers don't go off by accident. They don't. It's not going to happen. Now, clearly, we weren't there when Officer Whitten shot Cleveland Williams, but the official story of an accidental discharge is one of those stories that really stretches the bounds of belief. But regardless, Cleveland Williams ends up in hospital, and like I say, 4 operations and terrible damage. And to rub salt into the wound, he was then fined $50 and jailed after he made a partial recovery. Interestingly, down the road, Officer Whitten went to see Cleveland Williams and wished him well before his fight with Muhammed Ali. And they both said there was no hard feelings. So, what can you do? What can you say? I suspect that had the technology existed for there to be body cams and dashboard cams, we would be discussing this shooting in significantly different ways than the official version would have us believe. Different times, a white patrolman pulling over a black man, 1964, height of civil rights. Did Williams resist arrest? Did Williams? We don't know. I was alive, but I wasn't there. But regardless, this really threw Williams's career. And so this is November 64. He doesn't fight at all in 65. In 1966, he makes what was thought to be a miraculous return. Normally when you get gut shot with a .357, you're not going to be an athlete again. You're lucky if you're going to be walking. You're lucky, quite frankly, if you're going to be alive. But regardless, he makes this miraculous comeback, which is a testament to his incredible athleticism, his drive, his determination. And that comeback was nothing really short of, quite frankly, like I said, miraculous or inspirational. He has a number of fights, and he earns himself a title shot against none other than Muhammed Ali. And they say in one of the posters that you can find, images of, blinding speed against the cat's claws. So Cleveland Williams was still thought, even after this devastating, potentially life-ending shooting, he was still thought to be a really dangerous opponent for Ali. But of course, 1966 Ali is, if not at the absolute peak of his powers, really, really, really close to. I mean, I'm of the belief that we never saw the best of Ali because, of course, Ali was banned from boxing. So we didn't see a 68, a 69, a 70 version of Ali. You know, we see Ali at the absolute best. Then he takes a ban, 3.5 years. Then he comes back and he has a couple of fights, and he has his fight with Frazier. But Ali, who fought Frazier, was not the Ali who fought, say, Cleveland Williams or Ernie Terrell. He's got like a little half step of pace is missing, which is incredible, really. I mean, Ali throughout the 70s is still considered to be the greatest, and yet we never actually saw the best of Ali. Anyways, 1966 Ali is pretty damn close. But unfortunately, the champion's speed and his movement and precision proved simply overwhelming. Williams was not the man he was when he fought Sonny Liston. If he had been, would he have done better against Ali? We don't know. Possibly, maybe, probably. But 66 Ali is 66 Ali. What can you say, right? Anyways, Williams was stopped in the 3rd round, and many people consider this to be one of Muhammad Ali's finest performances. I mean, it is right up there. It's not quite as good as it would have been had Cleveland Williams, not been shot, but it's a damn good performance. I personally think his fight against Ernie Terrell was better. That's a very cruel type of Muhammad Ali, but his fight against Cleveland Williams is really, really good. You can see lots of absolute greatness in Muhammad Ali's performance. This, of course, was for the for the title fight, and it was a 3rd round KO. So even though his Williams wasn't quite the man he had been, his courage in stepping into the ring earned him the admiration of fans and fellow fighters alike. And he continued to fight after this loss to Muhammad Ali, including a unanimous decision over George Chuvalo, who we've spoken about here on this channel. And he fought his last fight in 1972. So if you say that he became a pro in 49, like BoxRec says, to 72, it's a long, long time. It's a 23-year career. If you say it was 1951 when he started through to 72, that's still a 21-year career. He ends up with a career record of 82 wins, 62 by way of, so that's a 75% KO ratio, 13 losses, 8 by way of KO, and 2 draws. He was 6'2", and he had an 80-inch reach. Now, his impact on the sport remained significant because he fought some of the very best heavyweights of the era. He was inspirational in the way he came back from this potentially life-ending shooting. He was also known for his sportsmanship and he exuded class, apparently, and he earned a lot of respect from both fighters and fans and officials. And this is again an era when black fighters had to work incredibly hard to get the same sort of level of respect from white America, if we can use that term. That was a term that used to be used. Different times, and it's times, but just when you dig into this, you can't help but spin your head, kind of thing. Now, Williams was, again, hit by the ultimate tragedy in that his life was ended prematurely. He was killed in 1999 in Houston, Texas, when he was crossing the road and he was hit by a hit-and-run driver. After boxing, he retired in 72 and he went work. He stayed in the Houston area. He works as a forklift driver, actually. So none of these old-time fighters were able to retire really rich or anything like that. They often sort of, if they were lucky, they could have an easier type of job. But many of them went back to just doing, you know, ordinary type jobs. And Williams was a forklift driver. But this hit and run accident ultimately killed him. He died in the hospital, you know, after this accident, and he was aged only 66. So a really sad story. You know, a premature end to his life. But we should remember Cleveland Williams, Big Cat Williams, as one of those contenders who, if they'd been fighting in a slightly less stacked era, could well have seen his name on a world title belt. If you've enjoyed this little retrospective of Cleveland Williams, I encourage you to go onto YouTube or other sources, read more about Cleveland Williams, look at some of his fights. But in particular, when you're looking at his fight against Ali, please remember that this was a man who 2 years earlier had been shot in the gut with a .357 revolver, and he had the bullet in his hip. That bullet was never removed. And so you imagine how incredibly tough and resilient, and the challenges that he overcame to get back into contention for a world heavyweight title fight against one of the two greatest heavyweights who's ever walked the planet. That's the way that Cleveland Williams should be remembered. He should also be remembered as somebody who went a few rounds with the best version of Sonny Liston, who many people were avoiding, terrified of. Cleveland Williams was not frightened of him, went into the ring with him, and duked it out for as long as he could. So, rest in peace, Cleveland Williams. A great fighter, provided a lot of entertainment to a lot of fans, and somebody who should be remembered. If you've enjoyed this video, please hit like, please subscribe. I very much like talking about historical fighters, and let me know if there's somebody, particularly from the heavyweight division, that you would like to see included. And we certainly have lots and lots of people to talk about, including some of the people that we've mentioned here. Maybe Ernie Terrell and Eddie Machen are worth doing a career retrospective on. It's my goal is to keep the memory of these great fighters alive, especially in an era now where we are being told that the best fighters who've ever lived are the ones we're seeing now, because that's a load of old bollocks. Okay, folks, that's enough for me. Thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you the next time. Cheers. Bye-bye.